What if the only people who could save your civilization were the ones you spent centuries trying to destroy? That is the impossible choice the Galactic Confederation now faces, and the answer terrifies them almost as much as the enemy already devouring their worlds. For 300 years, the Confederation of 12 systems believed peace was permanent. Their fleets patrolled quiet trade lanes. Their scientists cured diseases that once wiped out entire species. Their council chambers rang with careful diplomacy. Every conflict resolved through negotiation rather than bloodshed. It was, by every measure, a golden age. And then the stars themselves began to go dark. The Vorth swarm arrived without warning. Not a fleet, not an army, but something closer to plague-given form. Bioships the size of moons drifted between star systems, unfolding into billions of drone organisms that consumed everything. Metal, flesh, energy, memory. Entire planets that had stood for millennia were reduced to lifeless husks within days. Worse, the swarm learned. Every weapon fired against it became a lesson. Every tactic used to repel it was absorbed, studied, and defeated the next time it was tried. Confederation High Command threw everything they had at the swarm. Plasma cannons that could vaporize mountains barely scratched its outer shell. Diplomatic drones sent to attempt communication were absorbed within seconds. Even their most brilliant strategists, veterans of 1,000 simulated wars, found themselves outmaneuvered by an enemy that didn't strategize. It simply adapted faster than anyone could react. Counselor Vesserenthal, an ancient and dignified being who had never once raised a weapon in his life, stood before the emergency session with hands trembling. "We have lost the Kepler cluster," he announced. "For 100 million souls." Silence. Nothing remains but drifting ash. The chamber fell into stunned quiet. Then came the number that broke what little composure remained. Total casualties across the Confederation now exceeded 2 billion, with 3 more systems expected to fall within the week. It was Counselor Thal, of all people, who spoke the name no one wanted to say aloud. "There is one species," he said carefully, "whose history we have always considered a curse. A world we quarantined the moment we discovered it. A species so violent, so instinctively lethal, that we forbade any contact for fear of what they might do to the galaxy." He paused. Earth. The room erupted. Ambassadors who had spent careers condemning humanity's brutal history, its wars, its weapons, its capacity for violence, now face an unbearable irony. The very traits that had gotten humanity locked away in quarantine were now the only traits that might save everyone else. Admiral KRYO Voss, commander of what remained of the Confederation battle fleet, slammed his fist against the table. "We called them monsters. We called them a plague upon the stars. And now we begged them to fight our war." But Counselor Thal held up a data crystal, and the chamber went silent as it displayed the latest report from the fallen Kepler cluster, a moon-sized bioship devouring what had once been a thriving colony of 40 million people. Their final transmissions cut off mid-sentence. There was no more time for pride. There was no more time for old fears. The vote passed by a razor-thin margin. Humanity would be asked, not conquered, not commanded, asked, to join a war that was no longer optional to win. The message reached Earth on a gray Tuesday morning, breaking into every emergency broadcast system simultaneously. World leaders gathered within hours, stunned that the species who had quarantined and rejected them for over a century was now pleading for their help. The message was short, almost embarrassingly humble. "We know what you are capable of. We once feared it. Now we need it. Billions are dying. Please fight for us." Debate erupted across every capital on Earth. Some argued this was a trap, a manipulation from beings who had shown humanity nothing but suspicion and contempt for generations. Others argued that helping was pointless. Why save those who never once extended a hand of friendship? But then came the footage. The Confederation shared recordings of annihilated worlds, of children's toys drifting through irradiated ruins, of entire cultures erased in hours. It was undeniable. It was horrifying, and it demanded a response. In the end, it was a woman who had spent her entire career preparing for wars no one believed would come, who stood before the United Earth Council and made the case that would change everything. "They called us monsters," said Admiral Sarah Chun, her voice steady despite the weight of the room's attention. "Maybe we are, but even monsters can choose what they fight for. The vote was unanimous. Within 72 hours, humanity's greatest fleet, the culmination of a century of preparation for threats no one else believed existed, would launch into the void, carrying warriors trained for a kind of war the galaxy had never truly seen. As the launch countdown began and thrusters ignited across 100 warships in low orbit, one question hung over every soul aboard. Would the galaxy's most feared species become its salvation, or would this be humanity's final, fatal act of misplaced compassion? Nothing could have prepared the Confederation for what happened the moment the human fleet arrived at the front lines. What they witnessed in the first 6 hours of combat would shatter every assumption they'd ever held about war, and about the species they had once locked away in quarantine. The journey had taken 11 days through experimental jump corridors, humanity's engineers pushing drive technology to its absolute limits to reach the collapsing front before another system fell. Aboard the flagship Valkyrie, Admiral Sarah Chun watched tactical displays fill with red markers, Confederation positions being overrun in real time. Beside her, Sergeant Maria Santos, commander of the elite boarding unit known as the Reapers, studied footage of Earth bioships with a grim, focused calm that unsettled even her own crew. "They fight like a virus," she muttered. "No fear, no hesitation. We're not fighting soldiers. We're fighting an infection with teeth." When the human fleet dropped out of jump space above the besieged colony of Aldernar Prime, Confederation forces expected reinforcements to fall back into a defensive perimeter, as every Allied fleet had done before them. Instead, humanity attacked. Chun gave a single order that would become legend across a dozen star systems within days. "All ships, converge and strike. We're not here to survive this fight. We're here to end it." What followed left Confederation officers watching in stunned silence from their own bridges. Human vessels didn't hold formation in the cautious, calculated patterns of Confederation had drilled into every Allied fleet for generations. Instead, they used brutal, unpredictable tactics, kinetic bombardment runs that hurled mass-driver projectiles at relativistic speeds through the swarm's outer defenses, nuclear detonations timed with terrifying precision to crack open bioship hulls, and boarding actions that no rational strategist would have ever attempted against a living, breathing warship. Sergeant Santos led the first boarding assault personally, her Reaper team cutting through a bioship's outer membrane with plasma torches before dropping into corridors of pulsing, organic tissue that shuddered with something disturbingly close to a heartbeat. "Command center transmitting a bio signal every 4 seconds," she reported, voice tied over comms. "That's not just a ship. That thing is thinking." Her team pressed deeper, past defenses that regenerated in real time, until they reached what analysts believed was a neural cluster controlling thousands of drone organisms simultaneously. The detonation that followed didn't just destroy the command node. It caused a cascading failure that crippled nearly 40% of the Vorth force attacking Aldernar Prime. Confederation fleets that had fought and lost against similar numbers for 6 straight months watched an achievement accomplished in under 4 hours. Admiral KRYO Voss, watching from his own command deck, was heard saying only one word into an open channel: "Impossible." But the victory came with a price no one had anticipated. As Vorth remnants retreated into deep space, sensors detected something unprecedented. The surviving biomass wasn't simply fleeing. It was transmitting data back toward the greater swarm, sharing every tactic, every weapon signature, every strategic pattern humanity had just used. Chief Science Officer Dr. Elena Vasquez delivered the grim analysis personally to Admiral Chun. "They're not just retreating," she said. "They're studying us. Whatever we do next, it needs to be different, because they'll never fall for the same trick twice." Word of the victory spread through Confederation space like wildfire, transforming quiet murmurs of doubt into open astonishment. Species who had spent generations condemning humanity's violent instincts now found themselves toasting to the very warriors they'd once refused to even speak with. Counselor Thal watched the battle recordings on repeat, visibly shaken. "We call them a plague upon civilization," he whispered to an aide, "and they may be the only cure for the one actually destroying us." Yet even as celebrations rippled through Confederation systems, Admiral Chun remained unmoved by the praise. Standing in the observation deck of the Valkyrie, staring out at the drifting wreckage of the battle they'd just won, she voiced the fear gnawing at every strategist aboard her fleet. This wasn't their real army, she said quietly. This was a scouting force. A single colony's worth of defenders. If this is what they send to test us, what happens when they send everything? Her question would not go unanswered for long. Deep space sensor arrays, still recalibrating from the battle, began picking up a signal unlike anything recorded before, a gravitational disturbance so massive it registered as an anomaly rather than a fleet. Whatever was generating it was still weeks away, but it was already larger than every Confederation fleet combined, and it was moving directly toward human and allied space alike. The victory at Aldenar Prime was supposed to buy the galaxy time. Instead, it revealed something far more terrifying. The Vorth swarm doesn't just fight back. It learns, it evolves, and with every battle humanity wins, the war ahead only grows deadlier. In the weeks following the first engagement, human and Confederation forces launched a coordinated campaign to liberate colonies still under siege. Admiral Chen's fleet split into strike groups, each one racing from system to system, arriving just in time to break sieges that had trapped desperate populations for months. Confederation officers who once viewed humans with wary suspicion now fought shoulder to shoulder with them, adopting tactics that would have been unthinkable only weeks earlier. Counselor Thal, once the most cautious voice in chamber, personally requested that human military advisors be embedded within every remaining Confederation fleet. But each battle exposed a disturbing pattern. The Vorth swarm encountered at Meridian Station fought differently than the one at Aldenar Prime. Its outer shell had thickened in exactly the places human kinetic weapons had proven most effective. At the Kalvara asteroid fields, drone organisms began actively avoiding boarding parties, sealing corridors and flooding them with corrosive gas the moment human soldiers breached their hulls. Dr. Vasquez's science team worked around the clock, and her findings sent a chill through Fleet Command. It's not just adapting between engagements, she explained during an emergency briefing. The entire swarm is sharing data as a single organism. Every bioship we damage teaches every other bioship in existence. This meant every tactic humanity used bought less time with each repetition. Sergeant Santos and her Reaper team, now the most experienced boarding unit in the fleet, found themselves facing hive ships specifically evolved to counter their exact methods. During an assault on a bioship threatening the refugee convoy fleeing Dressel Colony, Santos' team encountered something new. Corridors that physically reshaped themselves in real time, sealing exits and funneling soldiers toward defensive nodes bristling with regenerating bioweapons. 2 of her soldiers didn't make it out. Santos herself, badly wounded, refused evacuation until the mission was complete, personally detonating the charges that saved over 200,000 refugee lives aboard the convoy. When she returned to the Valkyrie Medical Bay, Admiral Chen visited her personally. "You didn't need to stay in there," Chen said. Santos, her arm in a sling, looked up with an exhausted but unwavering expression. 200,000 people are alive because we did, she replied. That's the job. It was a moment that would come to define the entire campaign. Victories bought not through overwhelming firepower, but through soldiers willing to trade everything for strangers they would never meet. Yet even as human and Confederation forces liberated system after system, the disturbing gravitational anomaly detected weeks earlier continued its slow, inexorable advance. Deep space reconnaissance drones, launched at incredible risk, finally returned data that confirmed everyone's worst fears. What they'd fought until now, the bioships, the drone swarms, the hive minds commanding entire besieged systems, had been nothing more than an advanced scouting force, a single tendril of something unimaginably larger. The true Vorth Armada was a fleet of over 3,000 colossal bioships, each one dwarfing anything humanity or the Confederation had ever built, moving in a formation so vast it would take hours just to pass a single star system. Analysts estimated its combined biomass exceeded the entire population of every world it had already consumed combined, a horrifying, living monument to every civilization it had erased. And its projected course led directly toward the very heart of Allied space, a densely populated cluster of a dozen worlds that included humanity's forward staging point. Admiral Chen called an emergency council aboard the Valkyrie, human and Confederation officers crowding a single briefing room for the first time in the war. The mood was somber, almost funereal, as reconnaissance footage played across the main display, an ocean of bioships stretching beyond the sensor's ability to measure. Counselor Thal, watching alongside human officers he once would never have shared a room with, spoke the sentence that silenced the chamber completely. "Everything we have fought and won," he said quietly, "was only ever prelude. The real war begins now." Sergeant Santos, still recovering from her injuries, stood at the back of the room and stared at the screen in silence. Somewhere deep within her, a certainty was forming, one she hadn't yet spoken aloud, but one that would define the final chapter of this war. If the galaxy's survival came down to a single desperate act, she already knew who would be asked to carry it out. 3,000 bioships, one fleet standing in their path. As the true Vorth Armada bears down on the last defensible line in the galaxy, humanity and the Confederation must decide whether to retreat and save what remains, or make an impossible stand that could end everything. The days following the discovery of the true Armada were unlike anything the Alliance had experienced. Confederation shipyards across a dozen systems worked at maximum capacity, retrofitting every available vessel with human-designed weapon systems that had proven devastating against Vorth bioships. Earth itself mobilized its remaining strategic reserves, launching a second wave of reinforcements that included experimental weapons platforms never before deployed beyond Sol System. Every hour mattered, every ship counted, and still, when final tallies were calculated, the combined Allied fleet numbered barely 400 vessels against an armada of 3,000. Confederation High Command convened an emergency session that stretched over 18 hours, debating whether to abandon the forward staging cluster entirely and consolidate defenses deeper within Confederation territory. Counselor Thal argued passionately for retreat, citing the sheer impossibility of the odds. "We will be sacrificing our entire remaining fleet for a battle we cannot mathematically win," he insisted. "Strategic withdrawal preserves lives. It preserves a future." It was, by every conventional measure, the only rational decision. But Admiral Chin requested to address the Council directly, and what she said would be remembered as the turning point of the entire war. "If we retreat," she said, "we're not saving lives. We're choosing which billions die first. That armada doesn't stop being hungry because we ran. It just find an easier meal." She paused, letting the weight of her next words settle across the chamber. "We're not going to win this by being careful. We're going to win it by making them pay so dearly for every inch that they question whether this galaxy is worth consuming at all." The vote to make a final stand at the threshold line, a choke point system that funneled any approach toward Allied space through a narrow gravitational corridor, passed with the full support of both human and Confederation command. It was, everyone in that room understood, likely a decision that would cost most of them their lives. But for the first time since the war began, humans and the species who once feared them stood entirely united in purpose. Preparation for the battle transformed the threshold system into a fortress unlike anything the galaxy had seen. Minefields of experimental gravity charges were seeded across kilometers of space. Confederation shipyards, working alongside human engineers, produced a weapon theorized for decades but never built. A Nova device capable of triggering a controlled gravitational collapse powerful enough to tear apart biological matter across an area the size of a small star system. It was, by design, a weapon of absolute last resort, one that could only be detonated from within extremely close range of its target, requiring a delivery team willing to accept there would be no extraction. Sergeant Maria Santos volunteered before the weapon specifications were even finalized. When Admiral Chin tried to reassign her to a support role, given her recent injuries, Santos refused outright. "I've been inside these things more than anyone alive," she said. "I know where the heart of that armada beats. If someone has to carry that weapon in, it has to be someone who already knows the way." Chin looked at her for a long moment before finally nodding. Some decisions, she understood, weren't hers to overrule. As the threshold line braced for impact, the true scale of the coming battle became devastatingly clear. Sensor arrays detected the Vorth Armada beginning to shift formation, an unmistakable sign the swarm had detected the Alliance's defensive buildup and was preparing to strike with everything it had. Confederation scientists, monitoring the biosignature patterns radiating from the fleet, delivered one final, chilling piece of intelligence. Somewhere within that armada existed a singular, central hive mind, the true intelligence commanding every drone organism across the galaxy. Destroy it, and the entire swarm might collapse into mindless, directionless matter. Fail, and there will be no second chance for anyone. Admiral Chin stood on the observation deck of the Valkyrie one final time before battle, staring out at the assembled Allied fleet. 400 ships representing two civilizations that had spent a lifetime distrusting one another, now standing together against annihilation. Behind her, Sergeant Santos and her remaining Reaper team boarded the modified strike vessel that would carry the Nova device toward its target. As the countdown to Vorth Armada's arrival began ticking down on every display across the fleet, one truth became unavoidable. Within hours, this war will be decided one way or another, and there will be no survivors left to write the history of failure. 400 ships, 3,000 biotitans. What happens in the next several hours will decide whether the galaxy survives. And it begins with a battle so overwhelming that even Admiral Chen's boldest strategies may not be enough to hold the line. The Vorth Armada arrived at the threshold line exactly as predicted, an ocean of bioships filling every sensor display until the tactical map itself seemed to dissolve into an unbroken wall of red. Admiral Chen stood at the command center of the Valkyrie, watching as the first wave of drone organisms began pouring from the Armada's outermost vessels, a living tide moving to consume everything in its path. All ships, she announced, her voice carrying across every Allied vessel simultaneously. Hold formation. Let them come to us. The opening minutes of the battle were unlike anything either species had fought before. Confederation warships, retrofitted with human weapon systems, unleashed coordinated barrages that tore through the Vorth's leading edge, buying precious minutes as the gravitational minefields seeded weeks earlier began detonating in devastating chain reactions. Entire clusters of bioships were torn apart before they could even engage the main fleet. For a fleeting, hopeful moment, it seemed the impossible defense might actually hold. Then the true horror of the Armada's scale became apparent. As Allied forces destroyed the first wave, a second and third wave surged forward, seemingly limitless in number, the swarm's collective intelligence adapting its approach in real time based on every ship lost. Confederation Admiral Voss, commanding the northern flank, watched in growing dread as the formation began to buckle under sheer numerical pressure. "We're running out of minefields faster than they're running out of ships," he reported grimly. "At this rate, we hold for 6 hours. Maybe less." It was at this critical juncture that Admiral Chen made the decision that would define her legacy. Rather than falling back to preserve remaining forces, she ordered a bold maneuver few strategists would have dared attempt. Splitting the fleet to create an opening directly into the heart of the Armada, a corridor precisely wide enough for a single strike vessel to slip through undetected amid the chaos. It was an enormous gamble, one that exposed the flanks of the entire Allied fleet to devastating counterattack. But it was also the only way to give Sergeant Santos' team any chance of reaching the hive mind buried deep within the Armada's central bioship. "You're asking us to take losses we can't afford to open a door we don't know she can walk through," Voss argued over comms, his voice tense with the weight of what was being asked. Chen's reply was immediate and unwavering. "If she doesn't make it, none of us walk away from this system alive anyway. Open the corridor." The order was given, and Allied ships surged into positions that left them dangerously exposed, absorbing punishing losses as the swarm's forces attempted to close the gap. Aboard the strike vessel Requiem, Sergeant Santos and her remaining Reaper team watched the battle unfold through external sensors as their ship threaded a narrow, chaotic path directly toward the Armada's central hive ship, a bio-titan larger than any world they had ever encountered, pulsing with a bioluminescent glow that seemed almost alive with malevolent awareness. "That's it," Santos said quietly, staring at the approaching mass. "That's the heart of the whole damn thing." Her team fell silent, each of them understanding without needing to say it aloud that this mission carried no plan for extraction. As the Requiem closed the final distance to the hive ship, disaster struck. A swarm of drone organisms, alerted to the vessel's approach, broke off from a main battle and surged toward the small strike craft, threatening to overwhelm it before it could even reach the hive ship's surface. Santos made the call instantly, ordering her pilot to ram the vessel directly through the drone formation and into the hive ship's outer membrane, sacrificing the Requiem itself to buy the seconds needed to breach the target. The impact was catastrophic, tearing the strike vessel apart. But it worked. Santos and two surviving team members were thrown clear into the hive ship's interior, badly injured but alive, carrying the Nova device deep into the one place in the galaxy where it could end everything. Back at the threshold line, Admiral Chen watched her exposed fleet absorb devastating losses. Ship after ship going dark on the tactical display as the Fourth Armada pressed its advantage against the deliberately weakened flanks. The gambit had worked. Santos was inside, but the cost was mounting faster than anyone had feared, and with communications severed the moment the Requiem breached the hive ship's hull, no one on the outside had any way of knowing whether Santos' team was even still alive, or whether humanity's last, desperate throw of the dice had already failed in silence. Deep inside a living nightmare larger than most planets, 3 wounded soldiers carry the only weapon capable of ending this war, and they are about to make a choice that will define what humanity truly is once and for all. Sergeant Maria Santos regained consciousness in darkness. Surrounded by the pulsing, organic walls of the hive ship's interior, the Nova device still strapped securely to her back despite the violence of the Requiem's impact. Beside her, only 2 members of her Reaper team remained conscious, Corporal James Reyes and Specialist Aisha Okafor, both wounded but functional. Communications with the fleet were completely severed, the hive ship's biological structure jamming every frequency they attempted. They were alone, deep inside the largest living organism the galaxy had ever produced, with no way to call for help and no way out. Command center should be near the ship's core, Santos said, studying data pulled from her damaged tactical display, drawing on every lesson learned from a dozen previous boarding missions. If this thing really is a hive mind controlling the whole armada, that's where we'll find it. The team moved forward through corridors that shifted and pulsed with unsettling awareness, the walls themselves seeming to sense their intrusion. Twice, defensive biostructures nearly overwhelmed them, forcing desperate improvised tactics that cost them precious ammunition and time they didn't have to spare. Then came the moment that changed everything. As the team finally reached what their instruments identified as the ship's neural core, a massive chamber pulsing with bioluminescent light, home to something that radiated intelligence unlike anything encountered in any previous bioship. Specialist Okafor made a devastating discovery while calibrating the Nova device for detonation. The blast radius, she said, voice tight with dread. It's not going to be contained to this ship. Full gravitational collapse is going to consume everything within 100,000 kilometers. There is no way out of here once this detonates. Not for us. Not for anyone still this close. The 3 soldiers looked at one another, and in that silence, the true weight of the mission became clear. There would be no extraction. There never really had been. Corporal Reyes was the first to speak, his voice steady despite the circumstances. Then we make sure it counts. Santos nodded, activating the Nova device's arming sequence with hands that did not shake, despite knowing exactly what came next. She recorded a final message, transmitted on a delayed broadcast loop designed to escape the hive ship's jamming field the instant the vessel's structure began to fail. Admiral Chun, she said, if you're hearing this, it's already done. Tell the people back home that we chose this. Every person on this team chose this, so that billions of others wouldn't have to lose everything the way so many already have. Make it count. At the threshold line, Admiral Chen's fleet was buckling under merciless pressure, losses mounting faster than reinforcements could arrive, when suddenly, impossibly, the entire Fourth Armada began to shudder in unison. Every bioship across the battlefield froze mid-maneuver, as though some central signal governing their every movement had abruptly gone silent. Then, in a single blinding instant, the hive ship at the Armada's core detonated in a catastrophic gravitational collapse that tore outward across the battlefield in a wave of pure annihilating light, visible from star systems away. The Nova device's detonation created a devastating chain reaction, the sudden gravitational collapse ripping through the biological cohesion, binding the entire Armada together. Without their central intelligence, the remaining bioships across the threshold line lost all coordinated function, crumbling into inert, lifeless matter within minutes. What had been an unstoppable force just moments earlier now drifted silently through space, permanently and completely destroyed. The war was over. The Vorth Swarm, the plague that had consumed billions of lives across the galaxy, had finally, truly been erased. In the aftermath, as Allied forces began the somber process of recovering wreckage and honoring the dead, Admiral Chen received Santos's final transmission, delayed by the very jamming field that had once threatened to hide it forever. Standing in silence on the observation deck of the Valkyrie, she watched the message play, understanding immediately that Sergeant Maria Santos, Corporal James Reyes, and Specialist Aisha Okafor had knowingly given everything, without hesitation, so that a galaxy of strangers who had once feared and rejected their entire species could live. The Galactic Confederation, humble beyond words, formally rescinded humanity's quarantine within days, and Counselor Thal delivered an address broadcast to every surviving world in Confederation space. "We called them monsters," he said. "We called their world a place of death, their people a plague to be feared and contained. We were wrong. They did not come to conquer us. They came to save us, asking nothing in return but the chance to prove that what we call violence was, in truth, an unbreakable willingness to sacrifice everything for others." Across 100 worlds, memorials were raised bearing the names of Santos and her team, alongside a new title that would follow humanity for generations to come, no longer prisoners of a death world, but its proudest children, remembered forever as the ones who gave everything so that the galaxy itself might live on.